seems to be working. I'm Michael. I'm head of research at Chorus One. We are validator, but we have a big focus on MEV. One thing we've released is the official kind of grand study on the MEV mitigation on DYDX v4. And then we also do some validator-side MEV optimization on Ethereum. We've actually just released an article on this, so if you're interested in statistics on this kind of stuff, check it out on our website. Yeah, for this MEV panel, I think we are going to tackle it in 3 parts. In part 1, we're just going to talk a little bit about what is MEV, right? What are some nuances you might have to be aware of. Different types of MEV might be good or bad for different actors in the ecosystem. Then in part 2, we'll talk about where MEV accrues now. And then in part 3, we'll give an outlook in terms of, how might MEV accrue in the future and what are kind of some things that the panelists see there that could be moving in the medium term. Yeah, I think with that said, let's kick it off. Let's do a quick round of intros. Alex, do you want to take it away?
Thank you. My name is Alex Watts. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fastlane Labs, and we run the MEV system on the Polygon proof-of-stake network. Before we started working on that, my background was actually as a searcher, and I did a variety of different types of MEV, not sandwich attacks, not the bad kind, but pretty much all of the others. On a few different chains before I started working on the Fastlane relay over on Polygon.
Hi everyone, I'm Tomasz Here when talking about MEV, you can focus on my role at Flashbots, mostly in the last months focusing on MEV and PBS designs for L2, also designs on integrations of Swav, which is a Flashbots chain for the market for the mechanism designs for block building. And privacy for the user transactions. Also, I have experience building the NetApp client and generally the infrastructure for Ethereum and other chains for the last 6 years. Also, being in the staking world, representing here TwinStake, which is the institutional staking system.
Okay, thanks guys. So I'd say let's start tackling it by discussing what MEV actually is, right? So I would say it would be great if you could give your kind of definition of what MEV is, and if you could talk about different types of MEV, right? So typically there's something called a sandwich attack, which many people don't feel good about, like Alex, for example. But for example, if you're an LP, sandwich attacks could be a source of revenue for you, right? So there's actually some nuance there. What is harmful MEV, and would people have different perspectives on that? Alex, if you want to start.
Yeah, so MEV is one of these concepts where it seems like every year or so the definition changes. I remember back in the beginning, it was minor extractable value. Then it became maximal extractor value, and I think the real irony is that these days miners don't even really exist. It's validators now. But whenever I think of MEV, I think of just value that accrues to any sort of party that is a result of how the transactions in a block are ordered. So for instance, if there is value to being the very first transaction in a block, the very first a trader to access a trade that is only with limited availability, then I think that value might be considered MEV. There could be other forms of MEV where you can create value by reorganizing certain transactions inside of the block, and I think that would also be MEV. But I think the general idea here is that it's value attributable to where a transaction is located inside of the block, how it's ordered. But that's just my own personal definition, and I know that there are quite a few others out there.
I think one stable definition that we've been using for a long time with Flashbots is that MEV is any value that's available for the privileged actor by censoring, injecting, or reordering transactions. So usually when we think about privileged actors, we think about miners, validators, someone who does the block construction, but depending on the chains, that block construction has very different forms. Like think about chains which are offering first come first serve systems, then the MEV definition changes quite a lot. I mean, like, does it disappear or it stays? I think that privileged actor is very important because in any system, when we design the protocol, we can enshrine those privileged actors, so we can try to remove their ability to access that value, extract that value. And I think the whole idea of Flashbots always was how to design systems where either you remove the privileged actors whatsoever, so they don't appear in the design, or you restrict their ability to act in a malicious way, so to act maybe greedily or egoistically, and force them to redistribute the value in a most efficient for the entire network, for the users of the network way.
Okay, great. And then if we zoom in on Ethereum, which really is the prime venue for MEV at the moment, I think most people would agree with that. If you could just quickly describe the way PBS is set up, kind of who the different actors there are, and where the value accrues, right, across these actors. And if you think that there might be one actor in the PBS supply chain that's not compensated at the moment, and yeah, if you could quickly describe PBS and who captures value.
in the middle, the front run in the front, and the back run in the back. But this front run is actually something that we like to call a loss leader. It is something that costs money. It's usually having to pay swap fees, and it's usually buying a token that no one really actually wants to hold. The only reason the attacker is doing this is so that they can increase the price for the user. And what we found is that by taking these transactions and these bundles and just broadcasting them to everybody, other sandwich attackers will actually sandwich the sandwicher, which is quite a fascinating phenomenon. If you guys think back to, I think it was like March, there was this beacon chain exploit, the low-carb crusader, and they ended up tricking a relay into releasing transactions and then sandwiching a sandwicher to the tune of $24 million of exploit profit. Now, it was a genuine exploit. Some people might joke that the sandwich attackers should have used a lower slippage setting. But at the end of the day, it was an exploit because of the way that they access these transactions. And what we've really leaned into is using this as a defense mechanism. And because of this, we've not observed in the last year a single sandwich transaction occurring over our relay. And we get quite a lot of transactions. Polygon is a very fast network. I'm not going to say all the swaps are huge in volume, but we do get a lot of them. And so it's just been a really fascinating thing. But we don't do this in a vacuum. There is one huge trade-off that we make, and our trade-off is that we do trust validators. Validators alone have the ability to sandwich users. And what we've found is that Polygon validators are very aligned with the Polygon ecosystem, and so they don't. But it is one of the core principles that we are operating on.
So the title of this panel is Sustainable Optimization in the MEV PBS type supply chain. And I think a good way of discussing this question is by now diving a little bit deeper into the various actors that we just discussed, right? So on Ethereum, if I attempt a quick taxonomy, you have users, you kind of have wallets facilitating their transactions. You have searchers that take advantage of said transactions. You have builders that build blocks with searcher and user transactions. You have relays that propagate these transactions to validators, and then you have validators that end up putting the block on the chain. Now, there's been a discussion that has gained some steam around the fact that relays are not currently incentivized. And I think something that's on people's mind is block native just shut down the relay because of a lack of incentivization, right? So relays on Ethereum are essentially being run as a pro bono good. So the way I'd like to tackle this question is by asking Tomasz what your opinion is on relay incentives, if you think it's sustainable, if you think it can be run as a pro bono good, or if there would have to be some kind of economic compensation. And then Alex, if you could talk about the way that this is set up on Polygon and via Fastlane, and what you think some of the learnings there are that you've made. So Tomasz, what do you think on ETH?
Yeah, I think relay incentivization remains a problem, and that's why we also think about the enshrined PBS to remove the relay role from the system. Still, I think that in the past people were giving up a bit too fast any tries to make the relay something that can make money. We've seen recently the approach from Titan Relay to make an offer of saying, okay, Relay can provide a set of services to the builders that may make it a profit-making solution, and how the relays can compete with each other. Because when you want to monetize a system, you need to decide that you can provide any added value to whoever sends you information, right? So you Relay, you provide services for the builders. And what builders care about a lot is the latency of delivery of the blocks, and also the access to the full domain of all the block proposers. And that's what the relays can compete on, like how well integrated they are, and how efficient routings to the proposers they have. Are they having some routing to the collocated endpoints with the major data centers, or directly with the operators, with the major node operators? Do they have some solutions for solo validator operators? And also, is their infrastructure robust and efficient and can provide some additional data and insights into the operation? So can you actually operate by selling data in real time, selling data without affecting users, without any harm to the users? Can you provide low latency and good distribution? Still, I agree it's very, very hard to imagine that this provides enough value to like long term to build a sustainable business that has some like kind of growth opportunities. So the other options are to establish some kind of granting solutions from the foundation, from the major ecosystem players to ensure that at least that system while we work on ePBS, which is quite hard to solve as we've seen, that in the meantime we can cover the cost of independent relays operations. The other thing is very often the relay will arise from the operations of the searchers, builders, and it will lead to vertical integration. So just in the search for decreased latency, we'll end up with the relay acting as maybe not profitable, but part of the profitability of the vertical integrated system.
So this is something that we've actually been able to observe in real time on Polygon, because the way our system is set up is that searchers don't actually have to use our relay. Our system in Polygon uses a smart contract as an entry point for all searcher operations. It's one of the ways that we've been able to keep it, relatively trustless and decentralized. But because of that, searchers are able to submit their bundles through the mempool, with each transaction referencing the hash of other transactions that they would like included in the mempool. And so if they wanted to, searchers could actually entirely bypass the relay that we have set up. But they don't, because to Tomas's point, there is a huge latency advantage to using a centralized relay. And honestly, I just don't see any way around it. We've actually been monitoring, we've spent a decent amount of time looking at some of the numbers in comparison between the bid values, like the value accumulated through transactions or through MEV bundles coming through the mempool versus over the centralized relay. And it's a huge difference. Like it's more than twice as high bids are just like in terms of same value, same MEV, same target for the bundle, but the auctions are just much more competitive when they're happening faster and coming in over the centralized relay. And yeah, even if you do have some sort of enshrined, decentralized fallback option, and it is great having that, because I do like to tell people that with Fastlane we could turn our relay off and everything would still work, but it would be a huge hit to the MEV value that is earned and accumulated by the validators if we were to do that. And I think, yeah, to Tomas's point, it's something where there's some solutions being considered, but we're still waiting to see which one is going to end up on top.
Okay, so this is one actor in the MEV supply chain, the relay, and kind of where that would go. And I want to zoom in on another actor that's a bit earlier in the MEV supply chain, and that is the builder. Because of adverse impacts on user flow that manifest through MEV, we've seen the narrative around incentives, around intent pick up a little bit, right? So everybody here is probably familiar with CalSwap or similar types of solvers, which are set up to satisfy user intents in a manner which is, so to speak, MEV resistant. I'm curious where you see this particular space going. Could builders perhaps also be solvers? Because it seems like there might be a lot of synergies there. Alex, I know you have some opinions on this, so let's start with you here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this actually this is a perfect segue after talking about the latency advantages of running a relay. When it comes to intents, what are intents? It's when a user indicates that they want something. They don't really take a preference on how that thing is achieved. They just say, hey, I want it. And one of the fascinating things about MEV is that MEV searchers, they are extremely well positioned to be fulfillers of these intents. But another really fascinating thing too is happening, which is that builders, oftentimes we're seeing integrated searcher builders. These builders are able to simulate the fulfillment of these intents in a variety of different positions inside of the block. And because of that, the integrated searcher builders are actually the best positioned to fulfill these intents. This leads to quite a few potential adversarial conditions if you're looking at like intent networks that are off-chain, having to negotiate with potential intent fulfillers that are on-chain. And I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how this all plays out. This is also one of the reasons why I am arguably the largest Suave fanboy there is, because I've been going really, really deep into that code base, and I'm really excited to see how intents can be fulfilled on the Suave network as well. But I think in general, when it comes to the latency advantages of having like an in-house vertically integrated builder, that is something that is going to be huge, and that's also something that I think a lot of that revenue may get indirectly passed on to proposers and to validators. And so in the short term, yes, I think that a lot of the revenue for validators is highly related to like just like your generic MEV. But protocol designers are getting better and better and more efficient at limiting that. But now we have this entirely new space where we've got intent fulfillment and these solver networks, and it's my belief that a lot of that value, bundling revenue, so to speak, even inside of the 4337 EIP space, a lot of that value I think is going to get passed on to validators and to proposers, and I'm super excited to see how that plays out.
Yeah, so that's an excellent segue. You talked about Suave there. Tomasz, how do you see it?
To expand on Suave, right?
Suave builders, intents, synergies.
Yeah, Suave builders, intents, sure. So Suave being the system from Flashbots, like a chain where you can deploy the mechanism and say, okay, this smart contract, and here obviously when you hear about Fastlane being a smart contract system, it seems that Suave is a perfect platform for this. So Suave is a platform for these smart contract systems to say, okay, this is how you solve for intents. This is how you get access to the private order flows. This is how you manage the payments for the access to order flow. This is how you manage payment for some block construction opportunities. This is how you support the smart contracts to integrate, to compose together towards the block building. So Suave aims at allowing multiple parties to participate together in this decentralized block building process with the protection of the user intents or transactions that they sign or not sign if it's intent, and doing all of this with delivery for multiple chains. So starting with Ethereum and very naturally expanding to layer 2s or EVM related chains and then further. So the system is meant to be permissionless for various participants to build their solutions on top of Suave. And quite flexible for the MEVM. So it's practically EVM system with extension of multiple pre-compiles. So it's very Ethereum-like system that does not have to progress at the speed of other chains, and this is important. So the Suave chain only allows to deploy different smart contracts, but the block building happens really like off-chain. You invoke the smart contracts to slowly construct the block within the confidential data storage, and then you can access that block even if any block is not, if no block is produced on Suave. So yeah, I think it plays with all of this.
Okay, great. So we talked about relays, we talked about builders. Now I work as at a validator, so I'm also curious how the role of validators could develop in the future, right? So we talked a little bit about intents and builders fulfilling intents and Suave providing some capability there. And then a lot of intents, if you look at the CowSwap example, for example, really are more or less settled off-chain, right? How do you think validator revenue will develop in the future with this kind of intent settlement systems gaining some prominence? And Alex, I know that you're a team validator on Fastlane. How do you see it? Where should the incentives accrue in the kind of future vision of the MEV pipeline?
There's a really interesting game playing out in the Polygon right now that I think is going to be really fascinating, and I think might be a forecast of things to come. So right there are these, right now there are these bundlers, right? And these bundlers, what does a bundler do? This is not an MEV bundler. This is an account abstraction style bundler. This is an operation bundler. And what these bundlers do is they take these operations, which are these signed messages from users, but these signed messages are not transactions by themselves. And so what the bundlers do is they take the signed message, they put it inside of a transaction, and then they sign the transaction. Why do they do this? Why do they pay for the gas by signing the transaction? Well, because they get reimbursed. They get reimbursed by the user who had signed the original operation. And that's normal. That's been going on for over a year now. But what's fascinating is that on Polygon, there's this new type of MEV that's popped up, which is where these bundlers are taking these user operations, putting them in transactions, and then because there is no private relay, because we've blocked it as part of our attempt to looking at, a bundler versus bundler MEV game where the winner, like the real winner, is actually the validators, because these bundlers will keep front-running each other until all of a sudden it's at such a high gas price that it's no longer profitable to do so. It's this really fascinating MEV game, and I can't help but think that some version of that is going to play out with validators in the long term. Because fundamentally, it's up to the validator, it's up to the proposer, or even the builder, to determine which transactions are placed in what order. And with these user operations, in the future, with EIP 4337, they're all going to be publicly available. It's a full-on, publicly visible alternate mempool. And that is, in large part, a big part of the future of intents. And if you have a scenario where these different entities are competing over which one gets to fulfill the intents, well, who gets to decide who wins that competition? It's going to be the builder. And if we're looking at which builders get to decide which block it's going to be the one that can propose the most valuable block, which is to say it's going to be the one that extracts the most value so that they can then convey that value onto the validators. And so I do think that in the long term, we're going to see much lower revenue for validators from your traditional MEV as more and more of that get fixed. But we're also going to see much higher revenue to validators from user operations and from intent fulfillment, which will predominantly be handled via user operations.
Yeah, so I think that when we start talking about validators, that suddenly our thinking expands beyond the revenue and searching world and builders world, because we start talking about the security of the network and the security budget. So exploring both Ethereum layer 1 and all the L2s, analyzing of what should be the budget, the spending on the security that they pay to validators, well, you want to minimize it. From the perspective of the protocol, you want to pay the least possible amount to validators for securing your protocol. And, well, there's probably lots of node operators here, so you know that your revenue is combined of the block rewards, transaction fees, which very often are considered part of MEV, the MEV payments from the systems like PBS, Fastlane, and so on. And some of it is very predictable, some of it is a bit more volatile and maybe smoothens when you operate a lot of nodes, lots of validators. Now, also for many of those networks, it's very important design choice, or whether those validators can be permissionless or have to be selected via some governance model. So all of this defines of what exactly you want to do with the revenue from MEV. It might be a lesser evil and convenient thing to pay that to validators, but it's not really the ultimate goal. You want to either remove that MEV entirely by very efficient protocols, or not pay to validators at all and just redirect to users. If you pay validators from MEV, then you can decrease the general payment from the block rewards. And the total thing is what the protocol developers have to kind of like, or maybe protocol economists have to plan as the security budget and kind of yield interest rate that you pay, because all of that will be compared by the node operator when they make a decision whether they escape chain in search for another yield, whether for the allocators of capital, whether they want to stake with this chain or another. And I think soon we'll be entering into much more mature world of economics of the yields from different protocols and how much we pay for security and organizing that payment.
Okay, thank you. So we are out of time, but I think it's okay to conclude this panel by volunteering a quick summary of where the various actors in the MEV supply chain may go in the future. So if I'll just attempt that, stepping down, validators from first principles are responsible for chain security and are under pressure of opportunity cost because there are many chains out there and people want to be in the asset class, but might not be as opinionated on where they want to be, in which token. So from that perspective, validators will be fine because they'll need to be properly incentivized. Relays can build a business case around co-locating, is what Tomasz mentioned earlier, and in general, there might be something around latency, or you can run it as a pro bono good. And then builders in a world where many retail transactions are settled as intents could assume a kind of new hybrid role where they also work as bundlers. Is that fair? Anything to add to the summary?
No, I think on that point, when it comes to bundling, I think one of the fascinating things with the bundling revenue is that a lot of it goes to validators when there's competition over who can be the bundler. And one of the things that we're actually working on right now is a system for dApps to be able to control exactly that. And it's something that we find to be very fascinating. It's a way to repurpose all of the solving energy and the searcher networks that we've already built out on Polygon in order to have this maximally value retentive, it's a new phrase I came up with, environment for solving intents for different dApps. So we're very excited about that coming up.
Okay, Tomasz, anything you want to close with?
Well, lots to explore. Generally, these are most possible ideas, but I think we'll be exploring how different L2s will approach it, FCFS or new PBS models, enshrined PBS, and so on. It's quite exciting time to look at different mechanisms.
Yep, it's an exciting time, so thank you, and thanks everybody.